They say the dark is quiet, but I don't think it is. Sometimes it listens back. Where are you right now? And what time is it where you are? Leave it in the comments. Just try to stay still. Sometimes the quiet moves. It began not with a sound, but with the absence of it. A silence too deep to be natural. One that settled into the bones, like cold moisture, like the breath of something ancient pressing down, just outside perception. The house, long abandoned by its other inhabitants, had become a cavity of memory. Only he remained. Milo, a biology graduate entangled in the final threads of academic obligation. His thesis had been his tether to reality. Or so he thought. Long nights were spent hunched over documents, measuring patterns in insect morphology, plotting the ratios of compound eyes and antennae in honeybees, Apis mellifera, across larval development. The work had initially soothed him. Graphs, data, objectivity, until the patterns began to shift. It was gradual, the unraveling. At first it was the dream, a single night saturated in a surreal clarity no normal sleep could provide. He had become not himself, but a component of something else, something vast, a collective body, not as an observer, but as one of the many. A drone, perhaps, not figuratively, but biologically. He had no human limbs, no eyes, no lungs. His being had shifted into that of a creature governed by scent and vibration. The hive had not resembled any known to entomology. It pulsed with breath-like motion, its walls glistening with something too visceral to be wax, a living membrane, warm and fleshy. The cells expanded and contracted as if in sleep, and within them, not honey or larva, but thoughts, or perhaps echoes of them. Pheromones thickened the air into a syntax he could almost decipher. Meanings swirled without words, yet still carried shape and direction. One cell drew him forward, a cell unlike the others, sealed in black wax, its texture scorched, its edges crumbling as though fire had touched it. The other bees avoided it, but not him. He was drawn to it, as if by memory, as if it had been carved for him and him alone. As he touched it, the hive's hum collapsed into silence, a singular silence that contained a word, not spoken, but absorbed. A word with weight, a word now forgotten. Upon waking, he had clawed his way out of sleep, drenched in sweat. His fingernails had torn small half-moons into his palms. His mouth had been dry, his vision blurred. The sensation of something humming, just beyond the range of hearing, stayed with him through the morning. An ache behind the ears, a tremor behind the teeth. The thesis had continued. The data sets remained unchanged, but the file had not. Amid the meticulous graphs and Latin names, new lines appeared, untraceable, not present the day before. Sentences that bore no resemblance to academic language. Each eye remembers. The queen does not forget. You are part of the structure now. He deleted them without hesitation, assuming exhaustion, or perhaps that the file had become corrupted. He changed the password, backed it up to multiple sources, but each day, new phrases bloomed like fungal spores in the margins of his work. The house, too, had begun to change, not in any visible, measurable way, but perceptually. The dampness of the walls now carried a sweetness, faint, cloying, almost metallic. The garden, once overgrown with indifferent weeds, now loomed like something older than the house itself. Trees he did not remember stretched their arms toward the sky, bark darkened as if burnt. Moss choked the stone path. The world outside the windows felt further each day. Then came the honey. He had never bought it. Of that he was sure. A small jar, unlabeled, capped in dull metal, appeared one morning on the kitchen counter. Its contents were dark, almost black, with an iridescent sheen like old blood. He assumed it had been left behind by a former housemate, until he tasted it. It coated his tongue in a flavor impossible to place. Not sweet, not bitter, something else. It spoke of wood and rot, of roots in deep soil, of old things locked behind ancient doors. He gagged, spat it out, and discarded the jar into the bin. It returned. Each morning, it reappeared, in the same spot, unopened, untouched. The sight of it twisted something in his stomach. The silence of the house had grown heavier, now seeming to murmur in frequencies just shy of human comprehension. That night, he dreamt of the hive again. This time, the cell was open. Inside, a shape, not larval, not adult, something in between, and it was watching him. The days no longer followed the rhythm of light and darkness. They passed like layers of gauze pulled over his senses, one after another, softening reality into something ungraspable. Milo began to lose track of dates. The calendar on the wall remained unchanged. Mugs gathered in the sink. His clothes clung to him with the scent of cold sweat and sleepless nights. The honey jar became a fixture. It was no longer touched. It was observed. Sometimes moved. Sometimes not. Once he tried wrapping it in cloth and burying it in the garden behind the kitchen. A hole had been dug, the jar lowered in. The earth returned to its place. When he returned the next morning, his bare feet dragged across the kitchen tiles, and it was back, clean, untouched, centered perfectly on the counter. Something had changed in his skin. Not a rash, not anything visible, but a sensation deep within the layers, like crawling heat just beneath the surface. He began to feel the air differently, as if it carried density, information. Breathing became not a function, but a reception. He began noticing things in the silence that had no form, vibrations through walls, the pulse of electricity, moving unnaturally through appliances long unplugged. Even his laptop began behaving strangely, freezing only when he opened his thesis draft. The cursor blinked as though reluctant to appear. A figure began to visit his sleep. Not the hive, not the bees. A figure, tall and static, never moving, yet never quite still. Its limbs elongated in unnatural proportions, head tilted in impossible angles, always bathed in low amber light, always watching. Its presence didn't incite fear, at least not immediately. It evoked submission, reverence. He would awaken in the middle of the night, with his hands clasped together over his chest as if in worship, as if in surrender. He stopped writing altogether. The thesis draft was complete. Technically, the data sufficient, the findings clear. But he no longer saw it as his. The more he looked at it, the more it felt like a transcription of something given to him, not discovered. The strange sentences returned, now embedded between proper citations and structured paragraphs. They blended with academic tone. Compound memory persists across genetic lines. The structure exists before the organism. Perception is obedience. At night, he wandered the house, often barefoot, often forgetting to turn lights on. The rooms felt different in the dark, shaped by vibration instead of vision. A low-frequency hum followed him from room to room, not loud, but constant, a presence disguised as sound. The hum grew louder near the kitchen, loudest at the cabinet where the jar had first appeared. One night, unable to sleep, and unwilling to close his eyes again, he returned to the small lab he had built in the old study. The hive had never flourished before, not truly. At best, the insects had remained sluggish, their pattern of movement slow, uncertain. But now, they pulsed as one. Their formation had changed, no longer random. A structure had been formed, concentric hexagons, layered in fractal patterns. The bees moved with eerie precision, wings synchronized like mechanical fans. As Milo approached, they stilled, not in fear, but attention. He felt the pressure again behind his eyes, the feeling of being looked through rather than at, the feeling of being scanned, weighed, compared. He remained in front of the hive for hours, unable to step away. At one point, the bees shifted, their pattern breaking, reforming, shaping something new. A glyph, a symbol, a black cell, identical to the one in the dream. It pulsed. He did not touch it, but he did understand it, or part of it, the same way a child understands the sound of their name before knowing how to spell it. Something ancient had passed through the barrier between thought and language, into him. The next morning, Alejandra arrived. She had been summoned not by message or invitation, but by intuition, a shared sense perhaps. She entered the house quietly, her face drawn, her presence cautious. Words were spoken, but Milo barely remembered them. Only her presence had pierced the haze. She had found the honey. She had seen the state of the garden, overgrown, almost predatory. She had tried to laugh, tried to reconnect the moment to the world outside, but her laughter had caught in her throat. The air in the house was not air, it was breath. Something else was exhaling through the walls. That night, she had taken the upstairs room while Milo returned to the lab. The hive remained still, watchful. The pattern had shifted again. The glyph had multiplied. Now there were two black cells. One was his, the other not yet claimed. He felt drawn toward the cabinet in the kitchen, the same cabinet that had been with the house longer than memory. Its back panel looked different now, the grain of the wood twisted unnaturally. He tapped it, and again the sound changed midway, hollow, empty. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he returned upstairs, slept beside Alejandra in silence, and dreamed of wax closing around his limbs like skin. Milo's sleep no longer brought rest. When his eyes closed, his consciousness was submerged, not in dreams, but in memory loops, or perhaps they weren't his memories. The sequence was always the same. Darkness, a low hum, cells of warm wax closing tightly, and the suffocating certainty that something inside him was no longer human. Each time he awoke, the sensation remained. His chest felt heavier, his breath restricted, as if something had woven itself into his lungs during the night. The room around him buzzed faintly, the sound not perceptible to others but impossible to ignore. It resonated behind his teeth, within the space between his ribs. Alejandra left the next morning. She had packed in silence. Her eyes remained fixed on the hallway walls as she descended the stairs. Her parting words, if any had been spoken, were lost in the static. Milo had not followed her. He had remained at the kitchen doorway, observing the cabinet. She had not asked about the jar. The house became quieter still. If such a thing was possible, sounds no longer echoed. They were swallowed. The walls absorbed every footstep, every cough, every creak. Even the insects outside seemed to respect the boundary. Nothing entered, nothing left. Milo no longer used lights. Shadows suited the space now. His movements became slower, more deliberate. His sense of time, once tracked by phone or wristwatch, had dissolved. He followed other rhythms, those of the hive, the waxing and waning of the hum, the pulse of the house itself. The bees had begun constructing something new, not a hive, not even a structure. It was a form, a presence built from bodies, layered and alive, suspended within the old terrarium, like a sculpture in motion. The pattern mimicked anatomy, not human, not animal, but close enough to elicit discomfort. It was as if the insects were remembering something from before time. At night, Milo began to feel watched, not by an external force, but from within. His reflection in the hallway mirror looked unfamiliar, delayed in its mimicry. His pupils had begun to change, not in color or shape, but in texture. The irises appeared layered, as if covered in thin chitin. His skin grew dry, almost translucent in certain lights. The cabinet in the kitchen began to call to him, not audibly, but with intention. The pull grew stronger with each passing day. The wood behind it throbbed faintly under his touch. The panel had changed texture, no longer smooth, but porous, like old bark or dried flesh. Beneath his fingertips, it felt alive. He opened it on the seventh night. The latch had not resisted. The panel slid aside with the softness of a secret being told. Behind it, a narrow passage extended into the wall far deeper than architecture should allow. The walls of the corridor were slick, glistening with a sheen that shimmered like oil under candlelight. The air was thick, metallic, laced with the scent of sap and decay. He crawled inside without hesitation. The tunnel did not follow a linear path. It twisted and rose, then dipped suddenly. Gravity lost meaning. At some point, it became unclear whether he was crawling forward, upward, or inward. The deeper he moved, the more the humming intensified, not in volume, but in resonance. It began vibrating directly through his bones. Eventually, the space widened into a chamber. It pulsed with breath. The walls moved gently, expanding and contracting in slow intervals. The surface resembled tissue more than stone, layered membranes of wax, blood, and shadow. Embedded within the walls were cells, countless hexagonal cavities, some empty, some sealed with black wax. Others vibrated softly with movement. Milo approached one. The wax was translucent, just enough to see something curled inside. A human form, not fully formed, not entirely separate. It shimmered between shapes, not alive, not dead, just waiting. Then he saw his own cell. It pulsed in recognition. The black wax shimmered faintly under his presence, and for a moment the hum ceased. A message passed through him, not in words or thoughts, but in total knowing. The hive does not forget. It does not create. It remembers. It incubates. He backed away, not in fear but in awe. The chamber accepted him. The hum resumed, louder now, joyous. When he returned to the surface, dawn had not yet arrived. The cabinet door closed behind him. From the moment Milo emerged from the passage, the house no longer felt separate from the chamber below. The wood of the floor seemed warmer. The air carried a sweetness not found in the outside world. The walls whispered faintly, as if exhaling invisible pheromones meant only for him. He stopped answering messages. Alejandra tried calling twice. Her voice on the voicemail sounded like it came from far away, distorted by distance or memory. She asked if he was still writing, if he had gone back to the apiary, if he had opened that panel behind the cabinet. He never replied. The document for his thesis remained untouched. The final version had already been submitted and approved, but a separate file, one without a title, grew day by day, filled not with words but with patterns, diagrams, symbols, notations that no human syntax could contain. They spilled across the screen in hexagonal formations, interlaced with markings that mirrored the structure of wings and antennae, glyphs that resembled thoughts but not his own. He stopped eating solids. At first it had been a preference, then a necessity. His body no longer digested things as before. The only substance that sustained him was the honey, not the commercial type, the other one, the jar that returned each time it was discarded, its contents darker now, more viscous. He drank it slowly, reverently, as if it carried not only nutrients but instructions. Sleep became sporadic. His dreams deepened, no longer fragmented or symbolic. They felt real. He dreamt of cities made of wax, towers shaped like antennae, skies filled with wings that shimmered like stained glass. He dreamt of queens with eyes the size of doors, voices layered in 1,000 harmonies, and cells that opened to reveal not larvae, but memories, his own, rearranged. The hive continued to build. Inside the terrarium, the bees had long abandoned ordinary behavior. They no longer produced honey or protected a queen. Their movements followed patterns, repeating fractals that mirrored the documents Milo now filled with his diagrams. They had formed an altar. At the center of it lay a single larvae, unrecognizable in species, It pulsed gently, waiting. Sometimes in moments of lucidity, Milo asked himself if this was a delusion, a descent into madness provoked by isolation, obsession, and the silence of long-forgotten corridors. But each time the question dissolved before it could solidify, because the hum returned, and the hum was never wrong. He began marking his own skin, small hexagons drawn with ink at first, later carved lightly with the tip of a scalpel. Each pattern matched the ones in the thesis, the ones in the walls of the chamber. They didn't bleed, not anymore. His skin had changed texture, hardened. It had begun to remember its own shape. Weeks passed, or perhaps days. The difference no longer mattered. One evening, just before dusk, Milo returned to the chamber. The passage behind the cabinet opened effortlessly. No resistance, no sound. The descent was smoother now. The wax walls greeted him with warmth, like a cocoon welcoming its inhabitant. This time the sealed cell opened on its own. He crawled inside. Inside the walls shimmered. The hum grew soft, familiar, a vibration not heard but lived, like the murmur of blood through new veins. The wax closed behind him. The next morning Alejandra returned. She had decided to visit unannounced, compelled by an unease that she could not name. The house was still. No lights, no sound. She called his name but received only echoes in response. The cabinet was ajar. She didn't approach it. In the upstairs room she found the computer, still running. The screen displayed a pattern she didn't recognize. It shifted slowly, lines folding into themselves, forming a perfect hexagon, then splitting, dividing, repeating. She reached for the mouse, but the cursor refused to move. On the desk, a notebook. She opened it. Lines and symbols, thousands of them written in a spiral. No words, no explanations. At the center, a shape, a black wax cell. The sound reached her then. Faint, not in the room but beneath it. A vibration through the soles of her feet. It wasn't menacing. It wasn't welcoming either. It was simply present. A hum breathing through the floor. Alejandra closed the notebook, stepped back, and left the house in silence. Later, when asked about Milo, she would say she hadn't seen him in months, that he had finished his thesis and then vanished, that the pandemic had scattered people in strange directions, that some stories weren't meant to be pursued. But she would never forget the hum, the feeling of being near something not entirely alive, yet not dead either. Something waiting, and sometimes late at night she would wake up with the certainty that her dreams weren't hers, that something had been watching through her eyes, listening through her ears, remembering through her, just as Milo once had. And somewhere deep beneath a house with old walls and a wooden cabinet that shouldn't lead anywhere, the hive still breathed, still remembered, still incubated. The midday sun hovered low, cloaked in hazy white clouds that filtered the heat into something tolerable. Nathan crouched beside the last embedded rock at the edge of what Marla insisted would one day be a wildflower crescent. In truth, it resembled more a ragged clearing of stubborn weeds and half-sunken stone, the earth dry as parchment, and just as reluctant to give anything up. Most of the other rocks had yielded with little protest, lifted or rolled aside with a grunt and a pry. But this one was different. It refused, flat on top but curved beneath. Its bulk resisted even the heavy iron rod Nathan had wedged underneath it. Sweat beaded along his jawline, soaked the collar of his shirt. His knuckles turned pale around the handle as he leaned back once more, jaw tight. With a sudden pop, the soil surrendered. The stone rolled out with an unexpected ease, knocking into his shin, before dropping into the grass below with a dense, hollow thud. Marla joined him, wiping dirt from her palms onto her jeans as they stared. Its surface gleamed beneath the dust, deep burgundy threaded with metallic streaks that shimmered in the light like heated wire. A pattern, not natural veins, but intentional spirals, wound across it, perfect and endless. The rock was nearly spherical, not jagged, not shaped by erosion, smooth as ceramic, heavier than expected, yet somehow inviting. Nathan sprayed it down with the garden hose. Mud fell away in streaks, revealing more of the alien sheen beneath. Marla murmured something about keeping it. A garden centerpiece, perhaps. They laughed about ancient treasure, joking with nervous excitement. Then they rolled it into the shed, settled it onto an unused tarp, and closed the door behind them. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. Every time his eyelids drifted closed, the spirals returned, not as simple after images, but as something more. They rotated behind his eyes, not in vision, but in thought, looping endlessly, tightening like a noose. His heart thudded strangely, too fast then suddenly slow, as though trying to sync with a new rhythm that only the object knew. He shifted restlessly. A faint pressure had taken root just beneath his sternum. Not pain, but presence. At some point, without truly deciding to, he found himself on the back steps, barefoot, the air oddly humid for autumn. The shed stood in shadow, its outline barely visible beyond the overgrown garden path. The door hung slightly open. He didn't remember leaving it that way. Each step toward it sank deeper into a thick silence. The night carried no insects, no breeze. Even the distant hum of traffic had faded. The door creaked softly as he pushed it wider. Inside, the shape waited, lit by the dim glow of a single failing bulb. The stone spirals no longer sat still. They moved, a slow, deliberate rotation, not fast, not flashy, but undeniable. Nathan blinked rapidly, rubbed his eyes, stepped closer. The light flickered once, twice, then steadied. He squatted before the stone. Its surface remained smooth, but the spirals seemed deeper now, no longer merely surface patterns, but impressions descending into the material itself. And beneath them, something pulsed. It was faint, a glow that came and went with the rhythm of breath, as though the stone exhaled through invisible lungs. Green, not bright, but sickly and soft, like mold under a flashlight. The faint scent of earth turned metallic, then sour. His fingers hovered an inch from the shell. A vibration passed through the air, almost imperceptible, the kind of movement felt in bone rather than skin. His breath caught, his hand twitched, and before he could stop himself, he touched it. The vibration surged. A line fractured across the surface, rapid and jagged like lightning. Then another, and another. From within, the green glow brightened. Not light, but something denser, a fluid illumination that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. A crack opened along the center. Warm air escaped, damp, heavy. It carried with it the unmistakable scent of decay. Nathan fell back, breath shallow, unable to look away as the spiral patterns began to unravel. Not fade, unravel, as though they had never been markings, but bindings. The light overhead went out, and the sound began. A soft clicking, almost like insects, but rhythmic, calculated, like bone or chitin, knocking in sequence. Something organic, not human, yet purposeful. Inside the shell, something moved, and then, for the first time, the shape truly breathed. The darkness in the shed was nearly complete, broken only by the greenish light that now bled from the cracked object. It didn't cast illumination in the normal sense. Shadows did not form, and shapes remained indistinct. Instead, the glow seemed to stain the air, altering its texture, tinting it with the color of decomposition and damp soil long sealed beneath stone. Nathan remained frozen in a half-seated sprawl, breath caught at the back of his throat. His skin prickled. He tried to speak, to move, but the muscles in his legs had locked. The sound continued, the precise sharp clicking, like a sequence being entered into a lock that had not turned in centuries. A seam widened along the length of the stone. It opened, not with violence, not like a rupture, but a parting, as if the rock had always been designed to split, to bloom, like a grotesque flower. Thin layers peeled back along invisible hinges, revealing not jagged mineral or hollow space, but something moist, glossy, slick with motion. Inside was a structure of filaments and strands, webbed like tendons stretched across a cage of calcified bone. Pulses of green light ran along the sinews in steady, rhythmic intervals. At the center, a core, not solid, not liquid, spun slowly. It was spherical, suspended in threads, and seemed to churn with its own impossible gravity, pulling the eyes toward it and warping the space around it like a lens. It wasn't mechanical, nor was it biological. It was something between, and it was waking up. Nathan's hand, slick with sweat, clutched the edge of the tarp. His mind screamed for him to leave, to crawl, to run, to call for Marla, but the part of him that still thought rationally knew there were no words he could offer her, nothing he could say to make her understand this birth. Because that's what it was, something being born, or worse, something returning. The clicking stopped. Silence surged inward like a wave, not quiet, silence, deep and absolute, like the moment after impact, like the breath before collapse. Even his own breathing sounded foreign, too loud. The air grew hot, then cold, then warm again in uneven cycles, as if the shed itself had begun to inhale and exhale. Then it emerged. First, a limb, jointed, elongated, covered in thin layers of translucent skin stretched over dark, pulsing lines, a texture not unlike that of a cicada's wing, but denser, too wet. It touched the floor softly, testing. Then another followed, mirroring the movement. The creature, if it could be called that, pulled itself forward. It had no defined face, where one might expect eyes or a mouth. There was only a mass of concentric ridges, spiraling inward. As it turned toward Nathan, the green light within it flickered again, brighter now, reacting to his presence. It halted for a second, almost as if regarding him. Then a sound followed, not the clicking, a new sound. It resonated directly in his skull, bypassing the air entirely, a thrum, low and slow, like a vibration transmitted through bone. It wasn't language, not words, but meaning pressed against his thoughts all the same. A pressure behind the eyes, a suggestion behind the noise. He felt something being read, not his expression, his intent, his memory. A single image was forced to the front of his mind, the moment he had struck the stone with the hammer. The spiral at the center of the being's ridged face flared with heatless fire, and the sensation that followed was unmistakable. It was aware of him, and it did not forget. Nathan finally moved, not with grace, but with the stuttered desperation of a body breaking free from paralysis. He scrambled backward, knocking over a stack of paint cans and slipping on a coiled extension cord. The clang echoed through the night, useless sound swallowed by the suffocating air of the shed. The creature didn't chase. It stood, unmoving, half-shadowed, its limbs slightly curved like a mantis preparing to strike. The glow inside it pulsed more rapidly now, sinking. Nathan realized with horror to his heartbeat. Every accelerated thump in his chest was mirrored by a flicker deep in the spiral core. He turned and fled, out into the night, the screen door hanging off its hinges, bare feet scraping against the gravel driveway. The stars above seemed wrong somehow, like they had shifted during the moments in the shed. Constellations skewed, spacing irregular, as if the sky had rearranged itself to accommodate something newly awake. The house blazed with light. Marla had turned on every bulb, and her silhouette was framed in the window, arms crossed, confused. He burst through the door, slamming it behind him, gasping like a man saved from drowning. But he wasn't saved. He was marked. She grabbed his shoulders. What happened? What the hell? Your face. You're white as a sheet. He tried to explain, but the words didn't form. His voice sounded too thin in the warmth of the kitchen. The creature, the glow, the clicking, the cracking. None of it could be spoken without crumbling under its own absurdity. He choked out, "Something's wrong." Marla stiffened. With the stone, he nodded. But even that truth was already outdated. It wasn't the stone anymore. It was what had come out. She didn't believe him. Not really. She tried, took him by the arm, brought him to the couch, fetched a blanket, but every gesture of comfort widened the gap between them. How could she understand something that didn't fit into the dimensions of language? That night, they slept with the lights on. Nathan didn't close his eyes. In the morning, the garage was empty. The fractured shell of the stone remained, inert and cold, but the creature, or being, or whatever it had been, was gone. The green glow no longer pulsed. The cracked surface now resembled cooled volcanic glass, dull and lifeless. He scoured the property. Nothing. No prints, no slime, no hint of entry or exit. Just the hum. That low, bone-level resonance hadn't left. It was quieter now, barely perceptible, but present. It throbbed in the walls, in the trees, in the water pipes, in the black between dreams. It was inside him, and Marla noticed. She commented on the twitch in his eye, the way he stared too long at corners, the way he'd pause mid-sentence, eyes glassy and distant. He brushed her off, blamed stress, dehydration. But each night, the symptoms deepened. Then came the dreams. Not dreams, really. Experiences. Each began with the same scene. A massive spiral etched into a stone plain beneath a bleeding sky. He stood at its center, alone, while ridged, jointed shadows formed a circle around him. They didn't move. They waited. For what? He didn't know. In the distance, towering obelisks pulsed green. He would wake covered in sweat, hands clenched so tightly his nails left crescent moons in his palms. Blood on the sheets. Marla now slept in the guest room. He told no one. By the second week, the hum had grown. Not in volume, in range. Electronics in the house began to malfunction. The microwave flickered. The ceiling fan spun unevenly, blades slowing then jerking forward. The television turned itself on at 3:17 a.m. sharp, displaying nothing but a spiraling static, not circular but layered, like the creature's face. Worse still, animals avoided their property. No birds perched near the gutters. No squirrels crossed the lawn. The neighbor's dog, once known for barking at anything that moved, had gone silent when they passed. And then, one morning, Nathan noticed something new. On his chest, just beneath the collarbone, a faint spiral, red and raw, as if burned from within. He hadn't scratched himself, hadn't bumped into anything. It was symmetrical, intentional. A mark, the same shape he saw in the dream. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. Nathan didn't show Marla the spiral. He tried. He stood before the bathroom mirror, shirt lifted, fingering the reddened skin, but the words died behind clenched teeth. How could he explain that it hadn't appeared, but rather emerged? That it wasn't drawn on him, but rising from within? A spiral formed not by ink or burn, but by memory and intent, as though something ancient had always been there, dormant, and now it was surfacing. Instead, he covered it with gauze. That night, he went to the garage again, not to search, not to fear, but to listen. The cracked shell remained undisturbed, but the air within the room had thickened, as if time itself pressed inward, like the first seconds before a thunderclap. The hum was clearer now, no longer a vague vibration but a pattern, a rhythm, and with it came understanding. It wasn't a sound, it was a call, not sent outward into the world, but inward, to those who could feel it, to the marked. Marla left 3 days later. She didn't pack everything, only the essentials, a suitcase, toiletries, her camera. Her goodbye wasn't loud. It was tired, worn down from half-answers and sleepless nights. Nathan didn't argue. He stood at the end of the gravel drive and watched her taillights vanish into the forest, and still, he didn't tell her that he hadn't been sleeping, that the dreams weren't dreams, that during his trances, he had begun to understand the symbols that flashed behind his eyes, rotating geometric forms, impossibly complex, yet familiar. Messages, designs, a language built from rotation and recursion, from ancient loops and concentric intelligence. It spoke not in words, but shape. It taught him things, showed him maps, symbols, places that didn't exist in any atlas, names he couldn't pronounce, and promises. Always the same whisper, though never in sound. You are not broken, you are chosen. It happened on the 21st night. Nathan sat on the floor of the garage, legs crossed, the fractured boulder before him. The spiral on his chest glowed faintly beneath his shirt, pulsing in perfect synchrony with the air. Yes, the air, which now shimmered in waves, refracting space as if underwater. Then he saw the others. Not physically, not yet, but the sense of them, a convergence, minds like his, marked like him. Across the globe, scattered and waiting, all drawn to what had been buried in his soil, hidden in his stone. A fragment, a seed, a beacon. He was not the first to uncover one, and he would not be the last. The final dream was not a dream. It began with the spiral playing again, but this time it wasn't silent. A wind howled, high and melodic, carrying fragments of song, low voices chanting in perfect unity, not words but resonance. The obelisks glowed brighter, and then they moved. Not the shadows, the ground, the spiral itself shifted, groaning open like a blooming wound, revealing stairs that did not descend, but extended inward, curling like a nautilus, toward a core that could never be reached. He stepped forward and fell. Not through space, through self. Nathan was never seen again. The house stood empty for weeks. The neighbors assumed he had followed Marla, or perhaps left town in secret. But the mailbox filled, the lawn overgrew, and when the authorities finally entered, they found the home in quiet disarray. The garage was sealed. The boulder, now gray and inert, sat undisturbed, but in the basement, hidden behind a false wall, investigators discovered something else. A spiral, carved perfectly into the concrete, still warm to the touch, still pulsing, still waiting. 1,000 miles away, beneath a desert sky, a girl named Leah Reeves uncovered a stone, half buried in the dust behind her family's barn, smooth, round, veined with crimson and gold. She touched it. It hummed beneath her fingers, and far above the earth, something noticed, something turned, and the spirals began again.